Hi there, it's CEPA fellow Carrie Oderman. Welcome to the CEPA Podcast, where we bring together leaders and experts from both sides of the Atlantic to explore the biggest challenges shaping our world today. We hope you enjoy the episode.
Hello, and welcome to the CEPA Podcast. I am Alina Polyakova, President and CEO of the Center for European Policy Analysis. And today I am so delighted to have on the podcast a new diplomat in Washington, but certainly not a new diplomat in terms of her wide-ranging experience, the new ambassador of Ukraine to the United States, Ambassador Olha Stefanishyna, who before coming to DC in August of 2025 was a prominent figure in Ukraine, serving as the Deputy Prime Minister for European and Euro-Atlantic integration, as well as Ukraine's Minister of Justice. I'm not going to give too much away because we're going to get to know Ambassador Stefanishyna in this conversation. So, Ambassador, thank you so much for being here. It's wonderful to see you.
Hello, Alina. It's so good to see you. And we're really happy to engage with CEPA every time because you have such a strong Ukrainian profile and expertise and general European ones. So happy to see you. And thank you for inviting me for this conversation.
Well, it's our pleasure. So, as you know, we wanted to have a conversation with you to really get to know you as a person. You obviously serve an incredibly important role in your diplomatic capacity as ambassador in the ongoing negotiations between the United States, Ukraine, Russia, and Europe. But I think it's much more interesting sometimes to get a sense of where you come from, who you are, and how you think about the world, given your life experiences. So I wanted to start at the beginning. I know you were born in Odesa, which is a beautiful city on the Black Sea coast, an incredibly important port city for Ukraine as well, that some people may know now in a way they didn't before, because it has also been a major target of Russian attacks over the last 4 years of the big war. But when you think about growing up in Odesa, what was it like when you were a child there for people that have never visited? Are there any early memories that you could talk about? What was the city like? What was the feel? What are some of your early memories of growing up in that beautiful town?
Well, if there's something that immediately popped up in my head is like swimming in a fountain, you know. So this is one of the famous memories, my most favorite memories I had. So, but generally, you know, when you're a little bit older than 18, you're able to assess and to process your childhood from this more grown-up perspective. And I would say that. So I was really blessed to enjoy the total freedom in everything. I never, you know, Odesa has never been so much affected by Soviet power because this is a port city, the sea city. So it was by nature very cosmopolitic, but also I'm a Christian who grew up in the Jewish environment because the huge Jewish community is in Odesa. It's a very multicultural city. So we had in the area where I lived, we have the Roma family, we have Moldovan family, we had Jewish family, and probably our family was the only Ukrainian family in the whole environment. So it's a multicultural environment, but also an absolute freedom of expression and freedom of experiences I were able to get through my childhood. And of course, a lot of sea, a lot of sun, and a lot of tan, you know.
I remember visiting Odesa when I was a child growing up in Kiev, and then later when I lived in Ukraine as well in the early 20-teens. It's a very unique place that I think everybody that goes to Ukraine should try to visit, and multicultural in the sense of defining really what Ukraine is, a very multicultural country with many different ethnicities and languages spoken that a lot of people don't realize how multicultural Ukraine is. I think Odesa really embodies that. So you, like me, really came of age in the 1990s, which is a time period that, you know, some in Ukraine and in the broader post-Soviet transition period remember as a time of a lot of upheaval, a lot of uncertainty. And then there are others who remember it as a time of immense opportunity and political and economic opening. How do you remember your experience in the 1990s?
Well, I don't remember it absolutely like in a negative way. I just remember some questions which were like popping up in my head as I was a child. For example, when I was like something around like 8 or 9 years old, the war in Chechnya started, and I remember, so in Odessa, this community communicating is a very famous thing. So you're always gathering in a different crowd. So we always had a big crowd in our kitchen from different multicultural environments. So, and everybody were discussing this war, and somehow everybody was asking each other whether we should expect the war in Ukraine. And I just couldn't understand, why would anybody of the grown-ups even speak about that? Why would we have a war? So I just didn't smell it, because I never experienced that. I was basically born and grew up and started my school in the Ukrainian independent state. It was a Ukrainian language. It was also natural. So I just, didn't understood that. But also there was like a various economic complexities, which probably would be very tough if we would experience them these days. So I remember these coupons where we didn't have money. So we had these coupons, big pieces of paper, and you have to have scissors all the time because you had to cut them. So, but this was also the experience coming from the Soviet time, because there was like a lot of deficit and shortages and many things. So it was the same negative experience, but probably understanding that we own it and it's all in our hands, and now we can do something about that. So it was even like more positive. But coming from the region when I'm coming from, everybody are getting used to sharing. So mostly it was a positive experience, but also probably it's only at the end of 90s and the beginning of 2000s when we started to speak about European integration and other stuff. So the other unpacking started, because my grandparents finally believed that Ukraine become an independent state and it will remain an independent state, and the Soviets would not come back, and also the communists would not come back, but also that the new Ukrainian leadership are not communists. So, and it's only like in the beginning of 2000s that they started to share with their children, with my parents and my uncles and aunts, the history of our family, so about the Holodomor, about the repressions, about the imprisonments and all the other stuff. So, and this was a very unbelievable experience to me, because I knew that they have lived throughout all of their life trying to secure their children from this knowledge, not to put them under threat. So this is, a very intensive experience, but still it is positive, because you understood that you have a right to this knowledge, you can experience this, and you own this experience, and then you can do something about it.
Actually, I wanted to ask you, since you brought up, different generations in your family and their experiences, I think something that is not always well understood in the United States about Ukraine is that for generations, Ukraine's experienced huge losses, whether that was during the forced famine, the genocide of Holodomor, which was constructed and orchestrated by Stalin, and millions of Ukrainians died there. Then, of course, the losses of World War II, and it's a misnomer that it was mostly Russians that died in World War II. It was a lot of Ukrainians and Belarusians who fought on the front, because the front was in Ukraine. Tim Snyder wrote a book called Bloodlands, and if you look at a map of Bloodlands, it's like Western and Central Ukraine. So you mentioned that your family went through that historical experience and that you learned about it when you were, I guess, coming of age in the early 2000s and becoming an adult. How has learning about that and the family history, I suppose, affected how you think about the world today? Ukraine is obviously another conflict, huge losses. Do you think this contributes to the kind of resilience that we've seen in Ukraine in the last 4 years that many people talk about, including many of us here at CEPA?
Well, definitely you can speak about this for a long period of time, but unfortunately, I think all of this experience formed the genetic memory of a Ukrainian, right? So, and that's why, for example, when we hear in any foreign public environment, be it the United States or any other parts of the world, that this is the moment of time that Ukraine has to sign 28th points plan or any other kind of plan, or the declaration on intentions, let's say, to secure to guarantee Ukraine's security. This genetic memory gives us a signals, and puts the red flags here and there. And this is not something that is, in power of one person or the other person anywhere in the world to force Ukrainians to cross this red lines, because they are not formed by political cycle. They are not formed by any specific political group or political influence. They are formed by the very generational tragic experience of Ukrainians who faced so much suffering. And I'm 40 years old, and my parents have their sad experiences. Their parents had their experience, and their grandparents had their experience. We unfortunately were not able to hear a lot of stories from our grandmothers, grandfathers, or sisters and brothers, or my parents, because they just didn't make it, because they were either executed by communists, or they died because of Holodomor. And basically hearing, for example, the story of my aunt, and she's 80 years old, and in our family, their sister died when she was three weeks old, and she said, well, now it's a tragedy. Back in the time, it was not such a big story, because everybody were dying, and this gives you the very sense of tragedy, the generations of Ukrainians were experiencing. So that's why it really, we can call it resilience, but also we can call it let's say armor of generations, which helps us to save and secure our way of life. But because probably by surrendering, we understand that what is waiting for us is something we've already experienced for centuries, and this is something nobody else wants to go back to in Ukraine.
Now, thank you for talking about that. I think this history, this deep history that so many Ukrainians have experienced for generations, is just not something that is often discussed in the current moment. But I think it's really important to remember why so much of Ukrainian society now holds the views that it does, that despite the significant sacrifices that Ukraine is being forced to make now, there's almost a family emotional memory of what things could be like if Ukrainians don't fight, and people are not willing to do that.
Alina, there one thing I also want to mention. So there is a common perception, which is also formed very much by Russian propaganda, and this is what's called as one of the pretexts for this so-called special military operation, which is actually a military attack on the other state, is that this, Ukrainian nationalistic element was formed on the Western Ukraine, and the rest of Ukraine is very different. There's a Russian-speaking Ukraine, there's a pro-Russian or no pro-Ukrainian Ukraine. So the experiences of my family I'm talking about, they're not coming from the Western Ukraine. This is not Lviv or Zakarpattia or Ivano-Frankivsk or Ternopil. This is the central Ukraine. This is a Kirovograd and Mykolaiv region. This is central and southern Ukraine. And this is not something that really happened because of what was happening in Western Ukraine. And I think it's really important because this is not something. And my parents went to Odesa. They were Ukrainian speaking. They were coming from the villages in Kirovograd region and in Mykolaiv region, and they were Ukrainian speaking, but they were forced to speak Russian because this was the only way to get the normal education and to get access to job, to be socialized, to be accepted in the public environment. Going deeply into these topics give you the real sense of the sense of the reality. And there's no way you can undermine it, because this is not a story. This is not a political line. This is just a life story of one family. And this is why Russians are now trying to erase the identity of Ukrainian children that were abducted, because this is just the stories they know. They cannot lie about that. So, yeah, I just wanted to bring this. I think that's a very important element that.
No, you're absolutely right. And I wanted to talk a little bit about Ukrainian identity and nationhood, because you, through the prism of your life, because you eventually leave Odesa, you move to Kyiv, you become a lawyer. You go into private practice, and then you enter government in Ukraine. And in 2013, I assume you're in Kyiv then, in the fall of 2013, which is, of course, when the Euromaidan protests, as they were then called, begin. And really about what they were about at that time was Ukraine's and Ukrainians' desire to be part of Europe, to be part of the West, and to reject what was at the time being negotiated by an illegitimate leader, Viktor Yanukovych, a turn towards Russia. And these protests eventually lead to, what is now called the Revolution of Dignity in Ukraine. And I remember being in Ukraine at that time as well, during the beginning of the Euromaidan protests, and I don't know how to describe it to people who weren't there. It was such a dynamic, energetic, optimistic, almost magical few months there on the Maidan in Kyiv. In hindsight, I think a lot of people talk about that being the moment when we started to see what Ukrainian nationhood and identity really is. Because before that, there wasn't as much. There wasn't a revolutionary movement. There was, what I mean, in the fall of the Soviet Union, Ukraine is a multi-ethnic, multilingual country. And then that this was the moment where we saw that Ukraine is united around a vision for itself. Were you there on the Maidan? Is that a fair description of it? Do you agree that this was kind of a culminating moment for all of Ukraine, not just those who happened to be in Kyiv at the time?
Yeah, I have a little bit more complicated story about Euromaidan than that. So back in the time, I was 29 years old, and I saw that I've already seen it all in this life, which is not true, of course, now, as I understand. But when the Revolution of Dignity started, actually, I worked in the Ministry of Justice. So, I worked there. I started to work there before Yanukovych became president. And basically, he won the elections on the European slogans, right? So he promised that he will sign the association agreement. He will start the reforms, and that was so-called the European metrics of reforms needed to sign the agreement. But also, you remember, there was some political prisoners in Ukraine, like former Prime Minister Yulia Tymoshenko and the former Prosecutor General, or former Minister of Internal Affairs, then Prosecutor General Yuri Lutsenko. So, and I was in Justice Ministry, and I was basically helping to run this process and to prepare the association agreement for signature. And then I had only one daughter back in the time. She was like 2 years old, and I was on a sick leave with her when I got to know that this, resolution of the government was adopted to turn around the whole country, from Europe and turn it to the Russian direction. And I just remember watching it at the news, and I felt so calm, because I knew it's such a stupid decision, right? And the first thing I saw that, okay, so like people will be on the street, so there will be a protest. So and then we met in a small team in a ministry, and we decided that probably we should not resign, and we should still try to have it signed, because there was a Vilnius summit of EU leaders where the agreement had to be signed. And so we were trying to do something there, but also we were on the Maidan all the time. So it was both, and it was both tragic, sad, but also very inspiring experience, because you never knew what the next day would bring. And but then you still thought that there's something you can do. But also when we saw the first shooting on the Maidan, I think it's particularly important that we were able to secure access of international monitors to the medical facilities and to isolators and detention centers. So I mean, this is a very complex, probably is the first big experience in my life when I understood that I had to stand up and do something, and I can do that. And probably since then, after the Yanukovych escaped, and we started immediately prepare the agreement for signature. It was eventually signed, but also the annexation of Crimea started. So, and probably since then, I devoted a decade of my life to doing this European integration, but also making sure that my experiences and my knowledge are in use for this country.
What an interesting moment for you in that period of 2013, 2014, where you are working in the ministry, negotiating agreement for a free trade agreement with the EU that you believe to be the policy of your government. And then at the last minute, the president turns around and says, I'm not going to sign it. I'm going to sign this deal with the Russians instead. And that's, of course, when the protests begin. And that I didn't know about that experience you had. It's really interesting and life-shaping experience, I think. Thanks for telling us about that. We already talked about the theme of Ukraine's European integration. And of course, since the beginning of the war, which was in 2014 with the invasion of Crimea, Ukrainians have only gotten much more aligned on that this is the path that Ukraine must take. If you look at every single public opinion poll, it's very, very clear where the Ukrainian public wants to go. And then fast forwarding to your career, in 2020, you become Deputy Prime Minister, working on Euro-Atlantic integration. And of course, about 2 years later, we'll get to that moment, we have the full-scale invasion, February 2022. But I just want to ask about those 2 years. Obviously, we had a new presidential administration. President Zelensky is elected in 2019. You take on an incredibly important role. It's obviously the future of the country. It's where Zelensky wants to take the country. It's where Ukraine wants to go. What do you see as your greatest accomplishments in those 2 years in particular, from the time that you take up your post as Deputy Prime Minister to 2022, when the full-scale invasion begins?
Well, it's hard to say, and probably not that many things I would say would be that relevant and would look like a big accomplishments, but probably like I was invited to the government a year after President Zelensky was elected and the new government being formed, and I probably thought that I could really organize the processes politically and professionally in a way that like European integration will remain a like mainstreaming exercise for a country. But also even before President Zelensky was elected, he was very vocal in terms of Ukraine's membership to NATO, and this is where I had knowledge and experience, and this is why I was invited to government, because this is a like multi-domain effort. But also, when President won the election, he got more than 70% of support from all Ukrainians. But he formed the parliament with the mono majority and the government. So these were like a lot of new people with the new experiences, and they needed to have this framework. So, and I think this is the framework which I was building. And also at some point, it was decided that I become the member of the political board of the Sluga Narodu party, the presidential party. So this is, to shape this. And probably you can you can call it like a Kim Kardashian of the government, because when you say something that is Euro integration, that means that everybody thinks it's okay. So I just saw her interview recently, so this is how she was shaping her. But I think by the moment I've been living the government, we were looking back to this time together. I think it was a very important role that we always had a common ground in this, very differentiated environment of 200 members of parliament, right? 24 members of the government, dozens of institutions. Everybody had to form a unified background or ground for a common work. And I think this is what we did. And also, I think what is really important that Ukrainian leadership was let's say, welcomed by European leaders. And the thing I really felt as a difference is that President Zelensky was loved and welcomed in European family, in European political family. That prime ministers and presidents always wanted to get in touch with him to get a joint efforts started with him, and he really became a loved and welcomed friend in Brussels. So this is something that really was a process to be built.
So something, obviously something important happens 2 years into your term, approximately. And that's, of course, the full-scale military invasion. And there's something else important that happens a few days later that I want to get you to talk about. But I remember being at the Munich Security Conference a few days before the Russian invasion began. And the consensus there among Europeans was that this wasn't going to happen. And I remember having a conversation with a German colleague who shall remain anonymous. And I said, what would be a strong move is for the EU to push Ukraine's EU accession now and before the invasion begins. And that would be a strong signal. And he said, that's never going to happen. The EU is weak. They're never going to do that. And if there's an invasion, they'll definitely not do that. And so the invasion, of course, begins on the 24th of February, 2022. And then 4 days later, Ukraine applies for EU membership, if I'm not mistaken, that timeline. You're in the position to make that decision. Can you talk about those days, like the invasion and what went through your mind in that moment, and then the decision 4 days later, which seems in the context quite radical, actually, to say, yeah, there's now we're at war, but we're still going to do this. And it forced the EU to make a decision at that point, one that they were probably too weak to make on their own at that moment. Can you talk about that time period, what it was like? How did that decision to file for or to apply for membership right after the invasion, how did this all take shape?
Obviously, the bombs were literally falling on our heads, and this is the last thing you're thinking about, joining the European Union. So back in the time, I was running the humanitarian stuff, the coordination of all the, all the processes non-military related, and of course, I was using every connection and every contact I had with any capital I could reach out to work on military support, to work on whatever was needed at every particular minute since the war started. But then President gave an instruction, and he said that we're applying to membership before European Union. I said, say no more. We have everything prepared. We always had this file on our computers. So then you remember this was also the first time when the three branches of power, so the president of Ukraine, the speaker of Ukrainian parliament, and also the prime minister of Ukraine gathered together. It was 28th of February. Russians were still very close in Kiev, right? And they signed the application to membership in European Union. So for us, at this moment, this was the exceptional leadership, the exceptional spirit for Ukrainian people, the sense that all branches of power are here, and we're not giving up. We're standing up and taking, the actions nobody would expect us to. This was a very fresh experiences of the war. But also it was a challenge to European leaders so that they would have to say their word here and now, saying whether they stand with Ukraine or they do not stand with Ukraine. But also for me personally, it was a very symbolic gesture, because I said, this is how you complete your career. This is how this is the most exceptional way, you can complete the decade of your service to a country by applying to membership of European Union. And I felt so accomplished. I said that I can archive all files related to you and then continue, concentrating on, making sure that there is a breadth in every region, that there's everything which is needed, and etc. And then next morning we have a video call with president, and he says, "Okay, what do we do next?" And I said, "Sorry, Mr. President, I thought that it was the end, but for him it was just the beginning." So I think it's a very, very bright, let's say, moment. Speaking a lot about the president of Ukraine, but also about the thoughts all of us had back in the time. And also after that, many fantastic and miraculous things happened, but they happened because of us, because of our Ukrainians, because we were able to advocate, to prove, and to push for the right decisions. And probably since then, we have built this stamina to stand for what we think is right, and understand that maybe it takes a little bit longer for all the others to form a consensus on that. But eventually, we have this bold understanding of what is right, because we're always at the edge of our survival, and when people say that, when you're, about to die in 1 minute, you see all of your life in front of your eyes. So this is happening 24/7 in Ukraine. So that's why this was a very forming and inspiring moment for all of us. And these are the memories we all share with an exceptional warmth in our hearts.
Thank you for sharing that. I can only imagine like the speed of everything that had to be done in those early days, those decision points that had to be made. And I have one last question for you, because I know we're wrapping up here, but you are now, of course, freshly arrived to the U.S. You're in Washington. You moved here with your two kids, who I think have never spent much time in the U.S. before. How's it going? Any surprises? How are they experiencing America? How are you experiencing? Obviously, you have a diplomatic role, but you also have a personal life. How are you experiencing being in the U.S. now? What's your impression?
Well, we've been always really grateful to American people and American nation for all the support provided to my country throughout the war. But on a very personal note, I never imagined how grateful could I be to so many American people who helped me out to settle in this 3 months. So this is unbelievable. I never asked for somebody to help me, but everybody around were so kind. I got to know a nation of kind people who care about their lives, who care about others, like loving, caring nation, and this is truly a fascinating experience. I'm grateful to everybody who helped my kids to settle in a school. And everybody who tried to support our family by their experience and and the knowledges. And I'm grateful to you, Alina, because I was speaking about your experiences when you came to the United States, and I think the overwhelming gratitude I feel to the entire nation is really hard to explain. And the interesting thing about that this is also the experience of my kids. For example, they were really anxious about, going to school. Their English is not perfect. My son's English is like non-existing, right? So these were like a totally new environment. These were like a new kids. They didn't have their friends here. And, they got such a warm welcome at school that they couldn't really resist it. So they were really hesitant. They, were very defensive, and they were trying to put distance between themselves and the school. But the moment they went to school, the welcome was so warm and so frank, and there was so much openness that they could simply not resist that. So this is unbelievable, and I'm really grateful for these experiences, because somebody may say that I'm cold and I don't have a heart, because this is part of the job description, right? But also when you're coming from a country at war, and you have so many things in your head, like, for example, the contingency planning for night, you have the missile attacks, you have a very responsible position in a government, you have to protect your family, and my family is big. It's not only the kids, it's the grandparents and sisters and many others. And you feel you form this, ammunition on yourself, you just, deter many
block out emotion.
Yeah. But then, coming to US and talking to American people just on a very regular basis, I experienced some new warmth in my heart, and I'm really grateful for that.
Well, thank you for your time today. I think this conversation has clearly showed that you're a very warm and open-hearted person. Thank you for your time, and thank you for sharing so much about your life and your experience, and wish you all the luck. I don't think you'll need it. You're already doing an amazing job as ambassador, and just thank you. And we will definitely stay in touch.
Thank you, Alina. It was quite a new experience for me. I usually do not like talking a lot about myself, but I feel I can trust American people, and I wanted to pay back to all the kindness I received here, and thank you for taking your time for that.
It's my pleasure.
If you enjoyed listening, be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. You can find us on Apple Podcast, Spotify, or wherever else you get your podcasts. And to dive deeper into the issues shaping transatlantic policy, visit CEPA.org, where you'll find more expert analysis and research. And don't forget, you can find us all across social media for the latest updates, thought leadership, and exclusive content. Thanks for listening.